Okay, let me just dive right in because I'm
Okay.
so excited that you agreed to come on my podcast. The reason that I wanted you to come on my podcast, and it's called Life in Bold, is because I find you to be somebody that is very bold, as in when you walk into a room, I think people are like, who's that and what's she doing? And like, what's she gonna say?
It's usually because I'm stealing something.
Yeah. But I've seen you perform, so you do stand up.
Yes.
Is that all you do in terms of performance? Are you specifically stand up?
Yeah, currently.
Yeah.
I mean, like, I can do other stuff,
Of
but
course.
stand-up is for sure, like, my main squeeze.
Yes, exactly. And you're really good at it.
Thank you.
Do you feel like you're really good at it?
I
You've talked about this on other.
Yeah, I do. I've been doing stand-up for, like, over 8 years.
Yeah.
So at this point, I'm like, yeah, if I didn't think that I was at least pretty good at it,
Yeah.
I probably would have quit by now.
No, I guess so, because I do think that there are a lot of people who are bad, but they do think they're really good at it, so they don't quit.
I think that a large part of, like, having a long career in stand-up is being slightly delusional.
Yeah.
Because it sucks so much, and so much of, like, the beginning part of stand-up is designed to really, like, crush your spirit.
Yeah, right.
And so you just have to have this, like, blind faith that you're like, I'm actually great.
Yeah.
And everyone will eventually see that someday. And there's a lot of people who think that and then never have anything to back it up.
Yeah.
And then there's a lot of people like me where after, like, 6 years, your jokes start eventually becoming, like, a little bit funny.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I'm only about 2 years in. And so I remember we met each other in the Queer Comedy Festival that we did at Broadway Comedy Club.
Yes.
I was really excited that night to perform there because in 2014, before I moved to New York, my dad and I came to New York. We were looking at like neighborhoods in Brooklyn and just kind of apartment hunting without committing to anything because I hadn't actually moved here. And I got really kind of anxious because we were in Brooklyn, we were in Williamsburg, and I think I just like looked up like Williamsburg, and then I went to a place in Williamsburg, and it was purely like all residential on like a Tuesday afternoon at like 2 p.m. So there were no businesses, no restaurants, nothing, and I was like, Williamsburg sucks. Because I just didn't go to any cool part of Williamsburg.
Yeah.
And my dad noticed that I was freaking out. And I was like, oh my God, what if I don't want to move to New York? And he was like, let's just go somewhere else and like whether we know there's something fun happening and, remind ourselves where we are and why we're here. And so we went to Times Square. And we were walking around, and there was someone, and they're like, comedy show, Louis C.K. And I was like, oh my God, I love Louis C.K.
Yep, this is 2014. It certainly is.
Like, oh my God. And so I said, Dad, we have to go see Louis C.K. And I didn't know he was just saying that Louis C.K. had performed there at some point in
that's
the
how they
club's
get
history.
you. Yep.
I was such a newbie, and I went with my dad to Broadway Comedy Club, and it was one of those festivals. It was like a women's comedy festival, but it ended up being really entertaining. And my dad and I just kind of have this like memory of being like, because I wanted to do comedy. So it's just like, wow, this is so cool. So flash forward 8 years, I'm sitting in the green room of that with you. We sat next to each other, and you were just so nice and like welcoming, and I could tell you were like a pro.
Thank you.
I knew you were more experienced and like, but you were so kind.
Thank you. I appreciate that. This is my like third time doing the New York Queer Comedy Festival.
Yeah.
So like that specific room is one that I have been in like a fair amount of times.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what do you think of it? What does it feel when you're in that room? Now that you've been there for a bunch of times.
The green room of Broadway Comedy Club.
Yes.
It feels like work.
Yeah.
Because it is. Yeah. And I think that like there was a minute when I was like younger when I was like, oh my God, I'm at like a real Manhattan comedy club. I'm doing it.
Exactly.
And now I go to a show at a Manhattan comedy club and I'm like, oh great, a show where I don't get paid.
Okay, absolutely. Which transitions us into our, I didn't mean to emphasize transition so much.
It happens to the best of us.
It transitions into a topic that I'm curious if you want to talk about, which is like work, money, jobs, having jobs, not having jobs, looking for work, all of that, because I know you recently posted that you're like trying to make it on your own. You left your job.
Yeah.
what is that all about? Like, what are you trying to do? What are you trying to make money on?
So I had been working at the same TV production company since like 2017.
Yeah.
And I kind of realized that like I don't know if TV production is necessarily what I want to be doing, and then I was thinking about like, well, what do I want to do in a perfect world? How do I make my money? And the answer is stand up. And for a really long time, that was not something that was feasible in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
Because you make truly $0.00 doing comedy.
Yeah.
Many nights I lose $6 on subway fare, you know?
Totally.
But I have been lucky enough to do shows at colleges in the past couple years, and those pay all right.
Yeah.
And I like live in a tiny apartment in Brooklyn with a bunch of roommates, so my cost of living is like relatively low.
That's good.
And so I kind of realized that I'm getting to a point where it's like, can comedy be my only thing yet? No.
Yeah.
But can it be my main thing to a point where it's like, I'm reaching a point where it's like, okay, I am 23 years old, right? So now is kind of the perfect time for me to be broke and throw my whole pussy into my art.
Yeah.
And so I decided that like I'm gonna take a little bit of time off. I'm on unemployment right now. Rework my hour a little bit. Put the finishing touches on my pilot, and then go back out there. And I will eventually get, another job, but doing something part-time.
And when you finish a job, like, it is so healthy to not go right back in. Like, I've been laid off. So I've worked at 2 companies and I've been laid off from both. And over the last like 8 to 10 years. And, there's really just this feeling of like, let me just take a little bit to like reinvest in myself. I just gave so much effort, time, stress to another person's dream, another person's company. And it does feel nice if you can swing it with money, like to just take a few months and like be like, who am I and like what do I want to focus on?
Yeah. I don't know if I got a few months in me,
yeah.
but I got a few weeks for sure.
Right.
And then when I come back, like unless I get my dream job like writing for late night or something, I don't really want to put so much time into something again to the point where it feels like before it would be like between doing my full-time job and doing stand-up, I didn't really have as much time as I wanted to like spend with my friends or like write. When you do stand-up, you're doing the same 5 to 10 minute set every night.
Yeah.
And so, but what makes you money is doing longer form sets on the road.
Yeah.
And so I'm taking this time to kind of recombobulate my longer form set because the last time that I did an hour, or not the last time, but, the most well-known time that I did an hour was my special, which was like great and fun and has gotten me a lot of opportunities. And that was a couple years ago now, and that was created in like a very specific window of time where I had been out as transgender long enough to experience trans joy, but not long enough for it to like crush my spirit yet.
Yeah.
And now that I have had a little more time with it, I'm like, yeah, there are a lot of parts of that special that come off as like a little naive. And I think that cis people and straight people especially are obsessed with like coming out narratives because they're like, and then that's it and everything was great for all of time. And in reality, like being queer is not always like a walk in the park.
Yeah.
And
very often not.
And straight people don't want to think about that because they're complicit, And so I think that like I have different things to say now, and I just need to figure out a way to say them in a way that is palatable to straight audiences. And so I'm taking like a month to reconfigure that hour, and then I'm gonna hit the road with it.
Hit the road.
Yeah.
That's good. How do you plan something like that? Do you
Like-
just
like-
do you just go look up clubs and say, hey, I'd like to perform, and then end up?
Yeah,
kind
that's a
planning
lot of
something?
it.
Yeah.
I'm very lucky to have older, more experienced friends
Yeah.
that I can lean on to be like, hey, do you have any contacts here? Did you do this club? How did you like it?
Mm-hmm.
And then another thing is like, look at acts that you think you are similar to, and then but are maybe a little more successful than you. See where they've gone on tour, and then contact those venues.
Do you think there is anybody like you?
Not me specifically,
Yeah.
but like there
But people
are
who have a
there
similar
are
career.
trans comics who are like touring,
Yes. Right.
and if you go on their Instagram, they have the dates and the venues
I
of every
know.
place.
Yeah.
And so then I can be like, oh, I need to go to Denver. Let me
Yeah.
look up like 3 trans comics that I know have been on the road, see what venues they did in Denver,
Yeah.
and then
that's
I
a good
reach
idea.
out.
That's a good
Yeah.
idea.
And
That's
I
a good
think
idea.
that the best advice that I can give two great pieces of advice that I can give anyone who's trying to do comedy. Number 1, wait. Like
Mhm.
when you are starting out, you think that you are the hottest shit that has ever hit the
Yeah.
streets because all you're doing is open mics where you are watching the saddest, oldest men bomb with the most racist material of all time.
True.
And so, of course, you think you're great.
Mm-hmm.
But then, like, when you move up a little bit, you kind of come to terms with the fact that, like, oh, open mics are one thing, but doing shows, it's like a different, caliber
Literally,
of comedian. And so, like, number 1, don't try to, like, come up too early because you only get one first impression. So, like, wait until you think you're really ready. Give it at least a year, at least, before you start, like, going out for things.
Yeah.
The second piece of advice is when you do try to go out for things, look to comics that you think are similar to you and then use their resources. Literally, if you are trying to get, like, an agent or a manager,
Yeah.
find someone who you think is similar to you but more successful,
Mm-hmm.
go to their book me link, and whatever email address that is, send them an email being like,
Yeah.
I'm looking for representation, and
Yeah.
then move on from there. Do the same thing with clubs. Like, all of life is made easier by looking at people who came before you.
Yeah, I remember about 3 years ago, I was looking at, I don't know if I Googled mentorship or I don't know if I did something. I don't know if I was just like looking at someone's page that I admired or something, but they talked about doing like a self-led digital mentorship or something like that. And all they were talking about was like, go on someone's page and watch everything they've done, but also look who they've worked with, look what they've submitted. Like if you want to be an author, for example, like did they have a blog? Like all of that stuff. So I like that you're saying that because it is very true. I think that 2 years in, I've gotten to a place where I'm really just more having fun. Whereas before I was just really like, I thought I was hot shit at hot mics for sure, at mics because kind of was.
Yeah.
Like at a lot of mics, like you go and it is 10 people who are terrible and 10 people who are okay, and you're like, I'm somewhere within that,
Well, I mean, it's because the real thing is like the comics who are actually funny and successful,
right?
Don't do mics,
Yeah.
because they've moved past that, and their shows that they're the least excited about are the ones where they try new material,
right?
And so you're not going to be running into people who are like working comics at open mics. Working comics are working their new material out on stage at a show they don't care about.
Yeah.
And so like it's a whole different thing where then once you start doing those shows, then there's like there's like the tier of people who do like only open mics.
Yeah.
And then there's the tier of people who have like some shows but still use mics for new material because shows are more important to them.
Yeah.
And then there's the people who only do shows. And I think that like it's really easy to think that you're hot shit when you're like the king of the lowest tier.
Yes, right.
Yeah.
Well, no, I remember the first time I went, it was at a bar in Brooklyn. It was at the Alligator Lounge.
Yeah. Yes, it was.
And it was 3 minutes.
Yep.
3 minutes. You put a ticket in a bucket, and I was all nervous. You know, I went there to just watch, and then as I was watching the first few people, I was like, okay, I could do this, which is like the story of many people.
Yep.
And I put my name in there, and I didn't have anything, so I just put some bullet points. It was like a bad day at work. I don't know. And I really felt like I was better is not the right word, but like more palatable, or like not totally cringe.
Yeah, more palatable than men at open mics is the lowest bar. It's the lowest bar possible.
Yeah. So do you feel like your confidence has increased just as much as you've gotten better and better? You feel more and more confident?
So I think that like,
or the opposite?
I think that I got more realistic, not more confident. Where it's like, there was a while starting out where, like, yeah, I would see the same people bomb with the same horrible set about hookers and blow, like, night after night after night at the same open mics.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, I'm actually the funniest stand-up comic to ever walk the earth.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then I started doing shows with people who are like, you know, you'll be on shows with people who are going out for, like, just for laughs.
Yeah.
And then you're like, oh, man, am I even supposed to, like, be up here? And then you get on enough of those shows and you realize, like, well, if we're doing the same shows, is this person better than me? Yeah, but is there that much of a gap? Maybe not. Right. And like, you'll make friends with them, and then you realize, like, oh, this person who was just on Fallon is also someone that I'm gonna like run into at a house party. Totally. And that kind of makes things a little easier. And so, like, I think that it made me more confident in my abilities as a comedian. It did not make me more confident in, like, thinking I'm the best. Like, I am now very confident that I am in no way, like, the best comedian, but I'm also very confident that my material is the strongest it's ever been. Does that make sense?
It does, yeah. And I think I have heard you talk about, either on shows or on other podcasts and stuff, like trying to just become a really, really, really good comedian and like be the best comedian that at least like you can be.
Yeah.
Does that come from, like, has your motivation for comedy changed since you've started? Like, when you started, was it all about like, I want this glitz and glammy like comedy life, and now it's like I have something to say? Or like, has there been any kind of transition like that?
That's a really good question. I do think that it has changed because I think I started doing stand-up as a 15-year-old cis straight boy, like closeted. And so I had like the most depressing outlook on starting stand-up. I started stand-up being like, well, if I can't be happy, the least I can do is bring joy to other people. Okay. And so I started stand-up being like, it is my purpose on life to make as many other people happy for as long as I can. Yeah. And like, getting people to laugh is a very easy way to do that, and you can do it large scale by like being in front of audiences. Yeah. And then, like, there was a period of time, I guess. Well, not that I'm still not, like, I guess hypothetically this is the dream, right? Of being like John Mulaney, right? Being like selling out Madison Square Garden, right? And having my own Netflix special, and, you know, 14-year-olds on Tumblr have blogs dedicated just to me. Yes, yes, yes. But I think more realistically what I want is, like, I just want comedy to be how I make my money. I don't need to be rich. I don't need to be famous. I just, like, need to be able to sustain myself with my art. And unfortunately, like, I do think that a lot of times fame is necessary to hit that goal. You have to have like a little bit of a following, or like people that will buy tickets to things. Yeah. And that kind of sucks, but, like, you know, it comes with it. But I do think that, like, in moments where I get frustrated, because comedy is an incredibly frustrating business, as you know. Yeah. In moments where I get frustrated, it is helpful for me to remember why I started out in the first place, which was I want to make people laugh. And the fact that I get up on stage almost every night and I do get to make a room full of strangers laugh is like a blessing. And there's a lot of joy that can come from that gets lost in trying to commodify it. Yeah. It's not going to stop me from commodifying it or trying to, but, like, it is sometimes important for you to like remember your roots. But I do think like a lot of people do stand up to be like, I want to do stand up so I can get noticed, so I can write for late night. I want to do
Literally, yeah,
stand up so
right.
that I can be like Rachel Sennett, right?
Yeah.
Like I want to do stand up so that I can be an actress or can write movies and all that stuff like that. And like I see why people do that. Like money wise, it's a lot more viable of a
Yeah.
career path. But like for me, I'm like, listen, I'll do that stuff if I have to make money. But what I have wanted to do has always been stand-up comedy. This isn't like a means to an end.
Yeah.
This is the end for me.
Yeah.
This is what I want to be doing.
Now, you mentioned Tumblr, so I have to ask, as a teenager, did you have a Tumblr dedicated to a certain celebrity?
I didn't have Tumblr at all. I was like a pretty offline kid.
Yeah.
I played a lot of video games, but I didn't really have social media. I think I got Instagram when I was like 16 and then didn't use it at all.
You just like had one.
I just like had one. But then I got more into it as I got older. I think I got a Twitter account when I was like 18 years old, and then I got TikTok when I was probably 20, maybe 21.
Yeah.
And so from there, it's like,
it's so funny when people mention those ages and those social. It's kind of funny because it's like I'm just a world like of a bigger age than you, but I'm 31. But like, it's funny because I think I got Instagram when I was in college, like at 19 or something.
Yeah.
And I was big Facebook guy in high school.
Yeah.
But you know what? I was really big on. I was not big on YouTube, but I loved YouTube.
Yeah.
I loved watching YouTube. I had a show on YouTube.
What was it called?
Have you heard this? Have you heard what I've called it?
No.
Oh, because when you asked what I was like, the name is funny.
Okay.
So there's a whole story to the name, but like when you said, what is it called? I was like, oh, you've seen me. No, but it was called BJ in the Morning.
Okay. Yeah, it was.
And I started it. I was a really naive closeted, but also like I didn't even know, I wasn't aware of any. I didn't know I was gay, you know. And I had this web show because I had seen iCarly, and I started this YouTube channel. I would make music videos and funny little. I guess they were sketches, but I didn't know what a sketch was, you know. And just videos, and I would like put them out on YouTube and like promote them and send them on Facebook. I'm like, I have a new video out. Like I did this, you know. And so the moment I knew about content creation and Instagram and YouTube and social media, I was like, that's my thing. I'm into that. And it's funny because I feel like I love live performing so much. And I would say my career in entertainment that I'm wanting to build totally includes digital, totally includes that. So it's kind of an interesting journey, like trying, like, 'cause I have the podcasting is like totally amazing. I love editing. I love the technology behind it, all of that. But one time I saw you post or you talk on a podcast about your journey figuring out TikTok and like the algorithm, and like you were like, oh, I read what it was, and then I just did that and it worked. Is that how you feel about it?
Yeah. I mean, like, when I'm saying, like, stand-up is not a means to an end.
Right.
Stand-up is the end.
Yeah.
Social media is the
Part
means to that end.
Yes, right.
I actually hate it. I hate social media, but it's necessary to, like,
That's the words of a real artist.
Yeah.
Like, people who hate social media and love just what they do and are really not trying to get like 1 million followers in that way. Yeah. That's like, I noticed those people are very passionate about what they do.
Right. Like I'm trying to get 1 million followers because it will help me sell tickets to my shows, which is what I really want to do. I'm not trying to get 1 million followers because I want 1 million followers. But like I had been going to the same open mics in Brooklyn for months doing the same material that I had and like no one was booking me. And then I eventually posted that material online and it blew up.
Yeah.
And as soon as that happened, everyone who had been seeing me at these open mics doing that exact same material for months were suddenly like, wait, can I have you on my show?
Literally.
And I'm like, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
And so I think that being an artist is very process oriented. And I think that a lot of people who are like, A, a lot of people lose sight of that, and B, like a lot of people who are trying to get into it aren't like kind of miss out on that.
Yeah.
But like art it's not the end product, it's how you get there. And so I think that like for part of that process is like you have to learn how things work. And so
right.
I spent a lot of time reading like truly dense academic papers about how social media algorithms work, which this information is outdated at this point because they adapt those algorithms all the time.
Yeah.
But when I was reading it in 2020, it was how the algorithms worked at the time. And so I figured out like, here's the hack. Here's how you make it big online.
Yeah.
Quality does not matter.
Yeah.
It is just consistency. If you are posting every day, multiple times a day, and your videos are even slightly entertaining, the algorithm will eventually pick you up. There are other things you can do, like using like trending audios or using the right hashtags or making sure that you speak really clearly, like or avoiding certain keywords or putting certain keywords in, like all that kind of stuff. Captioning your videos correctly.
Yeah. You can do all of that and it can flop, but it's like it has to be.
But if
there's
you
something about the video that has to be.
If you do all of that for a long enough time, you're gonna get there.
Yeah.
Like it kind of, unless you are making truly the worst, most dog shit content like ever seen.
Yeah.
As long as you're doing the stuff that the algorithm likes, you will get a following eventually.
Yeah, right.
And like I think that my journey with being on the internet has been kind of interesting because like I never really loved it. But I was more on board with it at the beginning.
Yeah.
And things were like okay, you know. And then I amassed like a pretty large following specifically on TikTok. And then I got doxxed like 4 times in a row.
Yeah.
And now I'm like not really on the internet that much anymore.
Okay.
I post occasionally because I have to get booked on stuff or to get like, you know, no club is going to look at you twice if you have less than like 5,000 followers, or agent or manager or whatever. So having those numbers is like a way to flex and a way to get me ahead. So I post enough to like keep that up, I guess. But truly, I just like being on the receiving end of the like conservative hate machine really kind of took the magic out of social media for me. Where it's like now I purely view it as like a tool.
Yeah.
It is a means to an end. It's a way for me to make like a little bit of money. I don't make that much money off of it anymore, but I used to.
Yeah.
When I was doing it consistently, and it's a way to like have clout that I need for stand up, but that's kind of it.
Yeah, and that does suck about like getting hate and stuff because it just sometimes it makes it to the wrong people, and some people like I had a video in 2021 that got really viral and just totally went to the wrong people.
The burger video?
Yes.
Yeah.
That one, I don't know if you saw the video, but
I watched it this morning.
I turned off the comments on that one after like a week because it was the worst. It was just like people, it was like a third of it was just commentary on burgers and picky eating and stuff. And a third of it was like about my looks and like my hairline, my body size. Like you just looked at my hairline and you're like, well, you deserve it. So
you got my ass. No, I was like, well, what are they saying?
What are they saying? Do they have a point?
And they do not. Yeah. And they do not have a point. And I just needed to check for myself.
Yeah, you just
you got my ass. That's crazy.
And then that third were just total hate. Like, but the thing about some of the hate comments, maybe you'll relate to this, is like they're so basic that like the only thing they're really saying is that it's weird that I'm gay.
Yes.
And they don't know anything further than that. They're not like, oh, he's like this kind of gay, or like it's all just like, oh, you're gay. And it like, and like just like specifically like Trumpy Republican people like have their little nicknames for like queer people and like effeminate men or like whatever. And I'm like, okay, well, at the end of the day, like I am fine that I'm gay. Like I don't mind that I'm gay. And all you're saying is that I'm gay.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
so,
and it's like that's actually correct.
You know what I mean?
Fun fact.
And so, yeah, I'm actually like, yeah. And so there was just a couple that like were violence, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna turn off the comments, because one was like, this is the kind of gay guy. This was my straw. It was said, this is the kind of gay guy where it's okay to commit hate crimes.
Oh,
and I was like,
Jesus.
You know what? I'm gonna turn off the comments.
Yeah.
It had been like a week too. It had stopped growing, and I was like, I don't need the engagement as much. And then I actually had one yesterday go viral. I just like made a little, which I'm really happy.
The Trump one,
the Trump song, because I'm happy that an actual thing that was relevant to my career that I'm trying to build in comedy, like musical comedy, actually went viral. But these comments are either nice about me, or they are just commentary on the trial that Trump is going through. So I'm really enjoying these comments, because I'll get a notification, 99 plus comments, and they're all not about me. And I'm like, great, let's keep it going,
Yeah.
And I keep getting followers and stuff like that. But I really do enjoy the idea, the making videos and like the algorithm stuff and all that stuff. So it's kind of interesting, because I really do like meeting people who are so specifically into performing and stand up.
Yeah.
Because there's just, I would say it's a range. Like some people only want to do the internet, and they get find a lot of success on the internet, and then like, I should do a live show, and then the live show is like absolutely not good.
Oh man, don't even get me started. Don't even get me started on like influencer comments.
Right.
It's you can always tell when someone got big through the internet, because then they get on stage and have like no presence, or like it's not like a punchline, it's like a funny voice. And it's one of those things where it's like, yo, a stand-up audience is different than the audience that you get pushed to on a hyper-specific algorithm. And like, we've all been victim to that. I remember I had like, in probably like 2021, I had like maybe 5 videos about the band Weezer go viral.
Oh, really? Were they pro or anti-Weezer?
They were middle of the road. Yeah. They were Weezer critical, but not anti-Weezer.
Okay.
I like Weezer. And I posted them, and they went viral. There was like a minute where I was, I think, like the number 2 video on the Weezer hashtag on TikTok. I have long lost that spot.
Okay.
So I got it in my head that I was like, oh, these videos are all being successful. I should do my Weezer material on stage.
Oh, I see.
And then, fun fact, Weezer is not relevant in 2021. And so I did Weezer material on stage, and it bombed, all except for like one, truly the saddest, oldest white man in the corner was like half-heartedly chuckling at my Weezer jokes. And I was like, oh my God, Dad? But so it's a double-edged sword. And sometimes you'll see comics who got big on the internet do a show.
I think,
and you're like, oh, you don't actually have any
I think they should do different types of, like, they shouldn't go do stand-up, because stand-up is something that takes years and years and years and years and years to like get good at and to become famous on the internet, or like well-known on the internet, because of what you do on the internet, where you're editing every 3 seconds, and like you are filming 5 times and choosing the best one. Like it's a very different experience than being live on stage for 20 minutes and 30 minutes. That, because that's the thing that I notice, they don't do 5 minutes.
Well, they don't have to.
Yeah, they don't ever have to do 5 minutes.
Because they skip that part. I think that a lot of my comments about influencer comics are rooted in jealousy, and I'm willing to admit that.
Okay.
And I also think that additionally, like, there is a type of like stage presence, but I think this because, listen, I'm friends with a lot of like older, more veteran comics.
Yeah.
And they have this opinion of like, oh my God, like I can't believe that these people are like going viral on TikTok and then selling at a show, whereas like I've been working on my craft for years and I'm still struggling to get those kind of numbers and whatever. Yeah. And I do think that there's a thing where a little bit it's like a sign of the times. Like listen, when fucking the Beatles were playing rock and roll, our grandparents thought it was devil music or whatever. And so now,
Yeah.
comedy is changing a little bit, and we're like, well, that's not how it's supposed to be.
Right.
And I think that, like, there is a lot of, like, adapting and changing that has to happen. And I do think that a lot of these comedians who get big on the internet, not through doing stand-up, and then attempt to pivot to stand-up, will fall off and not stand the test of time. But I do think that there are some of them that are, like, pioneering a new style.
Yeah.
Where it's like, I watched Eddie Susie Izzard do her remix tour when she came to New York.
Yeah.
And I watched it, and I was blown away by how few punchlines there were. She did like 2 hours.
She's actually a stand-up comedian, right?
She's actually a stand-up comedian,
okay.
yeah. She did like, and she's like a stand-up comedian from like the 80s.
Yes, right.
And so she did like over an hour, and there were probably less than 15 punchlines.
Yeah.
And it made me laugh, and she sold out this theater. Everyone was laughing. She brought the house down.
Yeah.
It was a great show. But I watched that, and I was like, you don't see stand-up like that anymore. And I think that in many ways, like, you couldn't do stand-up like that. Like, I could not go on stage at Broadway Comedy Club and do 5 minutes that's one story with one punchline and a lot of silly voices.
Yeah.
Like, it wouldn't work. And so, like, I think that, and, like, you look at, like, the greats from, like, a long time ago, like George Carlin.
Yeah.
I love George Carlin. Would bomb it today at a lot of, like, clubs.
As an unknown person.
As an unknown person,
Yeah.
right. Like, the format that his style, his format, isn't necessarily viable in the way that we think of comedy in 2023. And through that, I think that Eddie Susie Izzard got big in, like, the 80s, so that's 50 years ago.
Yeah.
So 50 years from now, or 50 years from the 2010s even, so we'll say 2060.
Yeah.
John Mulaney is going to be doing his, like, big tour.
Yeah.
And someone my age is going to go watch that and be like, whoa,
Yeah.
stand-up used to be so different. And so I think that it's, like, something that's, like, an ever-adapting and changing medium.
Yeah.
And through that, like, a lot of how many people who do stand-up have a long-lasting career where, like, more than 3 of their specials are, like, truly successful.
Yeah.
It's like Bill Burr.
Yeah.
And that's kind of it.
Yeah.
And, like, through that, you see people like Dave Chappelle, right? Dave Chappelle is undisputed one of, like, the greats, one of the pillars of how we built comedy in the early 2000s. And no one will argue with you on that. Like, the Chappelle Show was incredible. His stand-up back in the day was, like, groundbreaking. And then you watch his specials now, and, like, outside of all the transphobic stuff, the jokes are not well written. Like, his formatting has gotten weird. The pacing is insanely slow.
Yeah.
The jokes aren't nearly as clever as they used to be. And it's one of those things where it's like, stand-up is such an ephemeral medium that, like, to do it well, you have to be kind of, like, cutting edge in some way, or if not cutting edge, at least, like, relevant to what is happening in the cultural zeitgeist at the time.
Yeah.
And to stay on top of that for more than 1 decade is, like, impossible. And so I look at comedians who come up through the internet, and I'm like, a lot of it I don't think is for me.
Yeah.
Right? And also, it's clearly working because they are selling out these huge shows.
Yeah.
So it's like, do I think that I want to emulate exactly what they are doing? No.
Yeah.
Do I think that I have a lot to learn from them? Yeah. I think that there is something really valuable about having a more, like, quote unquote traditional stand-up background as someone who started in 2015.
Yeah.
And who grew up listening to, like, my favorite comedians back in the day were, like, John Mulaney, Aziz Ansari, Hannibal Buress. So, like, through Nick Swardson, I loved.
Nick Swardson.
And so, like,
so funny.
stuff like that where it's like, okay, those are my roots, that's where I feel like I got a lot of my style from. And
Yeah.
also, I think that what is going to make me have a longer career and like quote unquote stand the test of time is not just doing stuff that I liked that I watched in 2015. It's taking what I learned from those people and combining it with stuff that I am learning now from other people who are coming up in this moment, where it's like you look at the comedians that I look up to as a 23-year-old woman are now in their like mid 40s, early to mid 40s. And so
who's that? Who would be that?
I mean, it is like
the reason I ask is because I feel like my people are like in their 50s.
Yeah.
You know.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I think
and it's women in their 50s.
It's women in their 50s. I think my like main, when people are like, who's the comedian that you whatever, it's John Mulaney.
Yeah.
And like I think my like Mount Rushmore, my comedy Mount Rushmore is John Mulaney, George Carlin, Robin Tran, and then probably Hannibal Buress, his early stuff. And like those people like formed my perception of comedy because they were who I was listening to when I was young. And so I think about who's my audience, the audience that I'm going to affect. It's not people my age. It's certainly not the same audience as John Mulaney. It's people who are like 15 now.
Yeah.
Or like, you know, maybe 15 in like 10 years if I have time to get bigger.
Yeah, right.
And so I think that it's one of those things where it's like you don't really get to see the effect of like style changes in comedy until after it's already happened.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Do you remember being young and discovering stand-up? Like, what was that like for you?
Oh man, I had a computer class.
Okay.
Where we did a lot of typing, and so because we were doing typing, no one was like speaking, so we wouldn't have to listen. So we were allowed to listen to music in class. So I would split my headphones with the kid who sat next to me, and I listened to like, okay, picture the saddest lesbian in your life.
Yes.
What kind of music does her father listen to?
Oh, yeah.
That's what I listened to when I was a kid.
And were you choosing like, the music, or was the other
so
kid
I
choosing
was
the music?
I was trying to choose the music, and I was like, oh my god, wait, let's listen to Ben Folds 5. And my like 7th grade buddy was like, no.
Yeah.
I have not experienced depression yet.
Oh.
And so he would be like, no, let me put you on to this, and would play the stand-up comedy radio station on Pandora.
Okay.
And so through that, like, I listened to a lot of what Pandora thought, not what I would like, but what Pandora thought the person sitting next to me in this class would like, because it was his Pandora station. And so it was like Kevin Hart, Daniel Tosh, Nick Swardson, Natasha Leggero, Aziz Ansari, Hannibal Buress, John Mulaney, Louis C.K.
Yeah.
And then, you know, I realized like, oh, I really like stand-up, and so I started listening on my own, and then my algorithm got like slightly more specific, and so I listened to more stuff that like I liked.
Yeah.
And then in, I want to say 2014, I had been listening to stand-up for like a couple years. I was like, this is incredible. I had been making little videos on my phone and sending them to my friends from high school. I called them More Crappy Comedy. They were terrible. It was mostly just me being like, well, I don't have a therapist, so I guess I got to talk to masturbation with someone.
Yeah.
I learned that Hannibal Buress was doing a show in my area, and so I got tickets. My friend got tickets. My parents drove us, and we were going to go see him. But then Hannibal Buress made that joke about Bill Cosby that kicked off the whole Bill Cosby thing.
Yeah.
And so he stopped touring for a minute. And
why did he stop touring? Because
he told that joke where he was like, more results come up if you Google Bill Cosby rapist than if you Google Hannibal Buress comedian.
Oh, okay.
Somebody recorded that set, posted it online. that joke went viral. Then people started Googling Bill Cosby rapist, and they were like, oh my God, wait, there's all this stuff about Bill Cosby.
Oh, yeah.
And then all these women started coming forward. And because he was kind of like obviously, I'm not saying Hannibal Buress brought the allegations to light, but he like kind of reinvigorated the public's opinion about those, or the public's interest in those allegations, which had been out there for years and years and years.
Yeah.
He got like a ton of attention overnight.
Did he get, like, threats and
stuff?
like
got threats and stuff. And so he stopped touring.
Wow.
And so his buddy, who was also a college comic at the time, a young man by the name of Jonathan Mulaney, was like, oh, I'll take that show for you.
Oh, okay.
So he filled in, and I got there early, and it was like a general admission show. So because I got there early, I sat in the front row, and he like used me and my friend for crowd work.
Wow.
And then like kind of realized how young we were partway through. At the end, like after speaking to us for a couple minutes, after the show was over, he like shook our hands before he left. And I remember being in the car on the way home. My parents were like, oh, like, what did you think of the show? And I was like, I think that's what I want to do.
Yeah.
You know, like that was the first time that comedy had seemed like not just something I'm interested in, but something that like could be a viable career path for me. And I do think like, and this is kind of corny to say, but like I was having a rough time in high school.
Yeah.
And so as being a closeted kid at a conservative high school in the 2010s was, you know?
Totally.
And so because of that, like I was having a brutal time, and stand-up kind of gave me something to like look forward to. And like, I don't know, a little bit of like a purpose. And as I mentioned earlier, like there was that part of me that was like, well, if I can never be happy, the least I can do is bring joy to other people. And so I think like in a lot of ways, having that like motivation and that goal did like, you know, save my life.
Totally. No, I relate to that.
And so I do think that there is like when you're talking about like, oh, what's your goal?
Yeah.
Part of my goal is like, I want to get big enough to be able to thank John Mulaney for that moment.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not trying to get on his level.
Totally.
But like enough that I can get that message to him, because when I was, you know, 18 years old and trying to message him on Facebook to be like, thanks, he's not really reading his DMs, you know?
Yeah.
So
what is it about him at that age, do you think, that you were so drawn to? Did you know about him before that show?
Yeah. So at the time that I was seeing that show, my top 3 comedians were Aziz Ansari, Hannibal Buress, John Mulaney. Of course, the Aziz Ansari stuff had not come to light at that point in time.
That's the other thing about comedy, lasting decades.
Yeah. And so I had been so excited to see Hannibal, and then I became so excited to see Mulaney.
Yeah.
And I do think that like anyone that you talk to about John Mulaney will tell you how good of a writer he is.
Totally.
And so I think that was a lot of the appeal. I also think a lot of the appeal was like, I don't know, his comedy was like, it wasn't vanilla. Like his comedy was not Jim Gaffigan.
Totally.
But it also wasn't Dane Cook. You know?
Yeah.
It was safe.
What about Dane Cook? What are those, or what about those are the extremes? Dane Cook is kind of like,
Dane Cook is like just talking about jerking off, and now we know that the women in those stories are like 16. And Jim Gaffigan is just talking about Hot Pockets.
Yes,
right.
I totally.
And John Mulaney like did have stories about like accidentally chasing a woman through the subway.
Yeah,
or, like,
right.
You know, weird stuff about drag queens that hasn't aged like 100%
Totally.
well, or talked about how he used to be an addict and stuff. So it wasn't like family friendly necessarily, but it wasn't something that I was like embarrassed to like. Like there were certain things where like, as many young women do, I had like a crippling sense of sexual shame.
Okay.
And so I think that like comedians that were like dirty as their thing, I like didn't want to tell people that I was listening to their stuff. But John Mulaney, was someone that like wasn't completely vanilla, wasn't completely milquetoast, wasn't boring to me.
Yeah.
But was something that I could talk to other people about and be like, wait, no, I love this. And like Hannibal Buress had stuff like that too, where like he had that jokes about like balls on bangs, or about like how he got testicular torsion and stuff,
Yeah.
where it's like, but it's not like cum and jizz and queefs and all that stuff.
Do you think about that with your own, like, are you trying to strike that same balance for that 15-year-old kid that's going to be your big fan? Like, are you trying to do similar stuff, or are you just not, you like that on them, but you're doing something a little bit different?
I think that my answer on that has changed over time and will continue to change over time.
Yeah.
And I think that a lot of that has to do with what audience you're working with. So like when I wrote my special, I was living in Western Massachusetts, which is not like the world's most vivid and robust comedy scene. It does have a comedy scene, but it's not like New York. And so my audience was mainly, the way I would test my jokes was mainly by posting them on the internet and seeing what kind of reaction they got.
Yeah.
And so through that, my audience was a lot of young queer and trans people, like young, like high school age.
Yeah.
And so through that, like, if you watch the tone of my special, it's like for young people, or not even just for young people, but like for people who are like a little sensitive, you know? And I think that you watch the stuff now that I do, and I'm like playing with fire a lot more. Like it's got a lot more of an edge to it than my earlier material did. And like, I am not trying to be some kind of like shock jockey, but I do think that like there is kind of space for, I've become so fed up with the rhetoric of like, you can't joke about anything these days, cancel culture, and like, I can't talk about the transgenders. And that rhetoric has gotten so frustrating to me that it has in a way pushed me to be like, no, you can say edgy shit on stage, you just have to be a better writer.
You have to be smart. That's what I say as well.
And so I'm trying to use myself as an example to be like, you can do edgy jokes about gender as long as like, and I do think that the best jokes come from a place of deep knowledge and understanding. And so, like, the reason why a lot of these comics are not able to do good jokes about gender or sexuality are because they have no understanding of it.
No understanding. And they're frustrated about it.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I think that, like, the more time you have to really, like, ruminate on that, the deeper your perspective is going to be, and that's going to make your jokes funnier because they're all, like, coming from a place of truth. Whereas a lot of people will be telling these gender jokes, and as someone who is transgender, I will listen to them and be like, okay, like, joke writing aside, like, the premise of that is unstable.
Yeah.
You have to, like, writing jokes is like building a house.
Right.
Like, it's important to have a good foundation. I think that your foundation is your knowledge base. And so if the joke is inherently predicated on something that is not 100% true, then like the theme of the joke is like off, then it doesn't matter how good your writing is going to be because you're building it on a shaky foundation.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it's not about being offended. It's like, no, actually you just said a joke that's not good.
Yeah, and that's my main problem with Dave Chappelle specifically.
Yes.
Is that I'm like, I will be the first to admit that I have so much respect for his career and especially for his earlier work. And I think the most disappointing thing about Dave Chappelle is not that he has been transphobic, which unequivocally he has.
Yeah. But
it's that I watch his specials and I'm like, yo, that isn't funny. And I think that his joke writing has gotten worse. And I think that that's like a problem, is that I have fundamental issues with his joke structure.
Yeah. And
the way his punchlines are set up, and the foundation that he builds them on is predicated on things that are untrue about transgender people.
Yeah.
And so like I would think that even if those jokes were not about transgender people and were about something completely different, I still don't think that his punchlines are very good.
Yeah.
And that's the main issue
Do you
I take
think
with
he's at that place in his career where he's just from a different time and he's just able to go on stage because he has such a rich fan base and people are just there to see him, and like he can just say almost anything that he wants and it's his style and people will love it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I think that a comedian's best work is always from before they make it big, because
Okay.
a large part of comedy is being like relatable in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
And so if you are like rich, if you're writing
Mhm.
jokes from your ranch in Wyoming that you own,
Yeah.
or Ohio, or wherever the fuck he lives,
Yeah.
like it's not going to be as relatable to people who
Yeah.
are like working class, which I
Yeah.
feel like is important. So there's that. And then I also think that like, yeah, the name Dave Chappelle has become such a huge thing that he's gonna sell out theaters and
Yeah.
get huge laughs kind of no matter what his material is, because
Kinda like
people
the
are there.
influencers.
Right, kind of like the influencers, because people are there explicitly to see Dave Chappelle,
Yeah.
not like to see like comedy that they like.
Yeah.
And like, again, respect where respect is due, credit where credit is due. Like, I do think that there was a point in time where Dave Chappelle was an incredible joke writer.
Yeah.
And do I think that time is now? No.
Yeah.
And I think that like when every pitch you get is a softball,
Yeah.
like you're gonna get worse
Mm.
at hitting curveballs and screwballs and shit,
Yeah.
because you don't have the practice with it. Every room that he comes into is like, oh my God, it's Dave Chappelle.
Yeah.
And so like, of course, so it doesn't, his jokes don't have to be as good because he's going to kill no matter what.
Yeah.
And because of that, I think that his comedy is like, is his success suffering? No. Is the quality of his jokes suffering? Absolutely.
Yeah. Right. Well, Sonny, you've been such a perfect podcast guest. I don't think I have to do any editing.
Amazing. That's what I like to hear.
You're not even have to edit anything out, and you're so good at telling stories and everything. So I really appreciate you coming on.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Okay. Now let's